It seems for as long as people have been playing music, there was always someone trying to make it louder. Whether it be the harpsichord to the piano, or the Spanish guitar to the dreadnought. But once the piano was perfected, where was there to go? Well, with the vacuum age arising, our sturdy resonant friends were about to get a rowdy, twice-removed cousin, the electric piano. By definition, these are instruments that produce a sound by electrically amplifying a vibrating element. The 1931 Neo-Bechstein was the first of its kind, taking a familiar grand piano package and rearranging its insides. The project, spearheaded by Walter Ernst, scaled back many features on the traditional grand piano, like its body size, string length, string diameter, and most importantly, it removed the soundboard. On an acoustic piano, the soundboard acts as its amplifier, taking the vibration from the strings and transducing it to a large piece of resonant wood that sits underneath the strings. On the Neo-Bechstein, it was externally amplified, so there was no need for this piece. So now you may ask, how exactly do the vibrations of the string reach the amplifier? Well, the key part in every electric piano is the pickup, or a piece of metal that converts the vibrations of the string into an electrical current. This keyboard used 18 electromagnetic pickups which the strings were strung under, so when they would vibrate, those vibrations would be relayed through those magnetic coils. Arguably the quirkiest part of the Neo-Bechstein was its mini hammers, as traditionally sized piano hammers were just too big for its specialty strings. Because of this, pianists found the action to feel very light and foreign. To remedy this, they created a dummy hammer, which would supply the weight, and when the key was pressed, rise up, and then have a mini hammer rise above it and then strike the string. Fortunately for us, the grand folks 100 years ago decided to record a bit of this instrument. This is the only period correct recording that I know of, which is telling of its reception. The music audience of the 30s didn't take kindly to it, and the ones who did had a rude awakening at how expensive it was. But there's another keyboard whose name has much been lost to time, that pioneered just like the Neo-Bechstein and arguably had a far greater impact than its counterpart. This is the story of the Vivi-Tone Clavier. Vivi-Tone was a small musical company that focused on acoustic and electric instruments, a rare find for the time. The main players in the business were Walter Moon in sales, Lewis Williams in production, and Lloyd Lohr in research and development. Located on 6331 Gratiot Avenue in Detroit, Michigan. It may have been larger, but from what I can tell, this is what it spanned. Only a year into its business life, they had amassed a catalog of violins, guitars, mandolins, and other stringed instruments, many of which offered features the public were not too accustomed yet, like the addition of an electronic pickup. In 1934, Vivi-Tone participated in the Century of Progress Expo, an extension of the World's Fair. There, they displayed their collection of electronic instruments as shown here. By now, you may have noticed Lohr was keen on turning any acoustic instrument he can get his hands on into an electrified one. The hardest of the bunch was arguably the clavier, a keyboard instrument that never went out of tune and relied solely on external speakers for amplification. This idea is not entirely unheard of though, as RCA's 1939 Story Tone used electromagnetic pickups to detect vibrations in acoustic piano strings, which were then transmitted to an amplifier. What makes the clavier special is its entirely different way of making a note: reeds. Now, to change the pitch of a piano string, you change its tension. But when you change the pitch of a reed, you're changing its mass. In theory, this would create a piano that would never go out of tune, as long as the reeds are bolted securely into their mounting point, unlike strings on a piano where they would slowly stretch over time. To my knowledge, Lloyd Loar was the first person to utilize this system instead of traditional piano strings. This has become the foundation of any electric piano you see from the 50s to the 80s that used a tine or reed-based system. Discovering all of this, I knew I had to find all the info I could so more people knew about this historic instrument. Like anyone, my first step was Google. Well, that's odd. Why don't we try the Videos tab? Okay then, what about Photos? To my amazement, there were only 5 photos of the Clavier on the internet, 3 of which were a particularly high quality, which brought me to the National Music Museum. Here in all of its glory were 3 high-quality images of the keyboard, the external amplifier, and the accompanying speaker cabinet, along with a brief but detailed write-up giving me a little more about the instrument. And that was it. No audio, no video, and with it not being on display at the museum, less than 10 people could have heard this instrument in the last few decades. And with the looks of it, it seemed like it was going to stay that way. Until today. After learning the National Music Museum had one of the 2 remaining Claviers, we decided to drive 8 hours to Vermillion, South Dakota, and see it for ourselves. The folks at the National Music Museum were kind enough to let me have total access to any portion of the keyboard. Without them, this would not have been possible. This is Arian Sheets, curator of stringed instruments at the museum, and she knows a hell of a lot more about Vivi-Tone and Loar's work than I ever could. Her and Daryl Martin have been a huge help when it comes to coordinating this whole effort. Unfortunately, providing me the resources I needed pretty stressful as we couldn't find the cable to connect the Clavier to an amplifier. Without it, this would have been a very different video. Yay. So we were able to find the adapter that connects the 30s-esque microphone center hot outer ground connector, and that would transfer it to your traditional 1/4-inch jack, which you can now plug into our modern amplifiers. So here it is, the Vivi-Tone Clavier. First impressions, I was really impressed on the front wood section. I mean, the lid is just so beautifully done. It really looks like a wonderful table. But this table has a special sauce underneath. Equipped with a music stand and beautiful wood furnishing, it really wouldn't look out of place in any high-end home of the time. But what it was out of place in is its sound. It has 73 keys, which is pretty abnormal for any electric piano of this kind to its date, and a volume knob. But before we get to playing, we have to go down to our 3-pedal lyre, which has our volume control, our bass sustain, and our full keyboard sustain. You'll also notice there is a board that would hold our external amplifier, which was added after the fact. And that external amplifier is this Webster PA, equipped with a microphone input, phonograph input, and a tone control knob. This amplifies the signal from the keyboard and transmits it to our paired speaker cabinet. Taking a look inside the speaker cabinet, you'll notice a motor and a flywheel which controls the tremolo effect. This is done by moving a board in front of your speaker, suppressing that sound for a second, and giving it kind of a wah-wah effect. This is similar to your Hammond Leslie, but that would come later in 1940. But instead of running it through that speaker, we're gonna run it through this PV Rage, because they don't trust us with all the stuff from here. But in all seriousness, it's about how old the amplifier is, and with old tube tech that hasn't been tested, it's important to make sure you know it's gonna run and run safely. So we're gonna take our output plug and we're gonna plug it into the amp. Now all that's left is to turn on the amp, and the amp should power the keyboard through the 1/4" jack. Here goes nothing. So quiet. Oh. So we're just gonna pop this top forward and it should just lift off. And then to get this front part off, there's just 2 screws that we undo. Real easy. Now, unlike a Wurlitzer, this reed bar spans the whole way, but there are points that have capacitors which will lower the voltage in those specific pickups to make the whole playing level even. The problem is those capacitors are 91 years old and they don't work. On the treble end, we still have some signal, but our bass, the whole bottom third of the keyboard, is totally dead. Definitely puts a bit of a stick in our wheel, but we're gonna go ahead and do the rest of the keyboard like we normally would and record it as best as we can. So what I'm doing right now is just feeling for any key inconsistencies like these, and we're just gonna start with the easiest problems, which are usually in your balance rails and your front rails, because each key has some felt on both ends, and over time that felt can swell, and if you happen to be 100 years old, you're gonna be pretty swollen. So what we're gonna do is see if these keys are just rubbing against each other or if they are actually individually the problem, like a great couple. So this one works with this one out, which means that this one in also works. So we just need to bend one of them one way so that they're not rubbing up against each other. Oh, it's probably this lead. So what we found on 4 offenders is a bit of bulging lead. It's corrosion on this specific situation, but there are little lead circular pieces that are put in your key to make sure they're nice and balanced and play all right. And these apparently are starting to grow a bit of corrosion on them, and they're rubbing up against their neighbors. So we're gonna try and chisel it or file it. So we ended up just chiseling down the leads and that corrosion, and now we have a nice smooth surface for these 2 keys to work off of and hopefully not stick anymore. Taking apart our Clavier's action, it looks a little like this. Here's our damper section, and here's our whip-in and faux jack. What happens when you press a key is the other end of the key you press comes up, which then pushes the spoon up and lifts up your damper. While doing that, the special part of the Clavier is right here, which is actually what plucks the reed while moving up. So you're moving up the whip-in, which then plucks the reed, but at the same time, now that the spoon's here, it moves up the damper, this felt, which then lets the reed ring out. And when you depress or stop pressing the key, then the whip-in comes back down, and so does your damper arm. And what makes the Clavier cool is its plucking action versus its later cousin, the Wurlitzer. And zooming in on our little plucker here, well, you can notice that there's adjustability built in to this piece of wood. If you loosen that screw, you're able to move the plucker forward and backward, which would then change the volume of each note by how much reed is being lifted up and then let go. So touching on the tuning, you'll notice that the reeds on this keyboard are much thicker than Wurlitzer reeds. And it's quite astonishing just how wide they are. So you can see some of the reeds are poking out the back a little farther than others, indicating how they are tuned and maybe cut at different lengths. Now before we pack everything up, I want to show you guys how the volume pedal works, or your una corda. What happens is, once the pedal is pushed down, the rod here is pushed up, which then moves a volume pod or potentiometer, and that then changes the volume of the output signal. How cool is that? It's also important to mention how much shielding this instrument had. It's definitely known to be a little noisy, so they plated all of the back action portion in this thick sheet metal, and gets fingerprints pretty well. Now with all that settled, let's get this all put together so we can start playing it. As you can hear, it's pretty quiet and pretty noisy. We had to boost those levels in post-processing quite a bit, and the results brought up a lot of that bottom surface hum that just isn't present when you're here in person. Still, in person, it's quiet. It's almost like a whisper, how faint it is even with the levels on my recorder boosted all the way. So hope that was tolerable, and for now, it's the best we can get out of it. But if you listen to that and you're like, wow, I really wish I could play this myself. Sorry. Just kidding. I have had the amazing opportunity to sample this, at least what is still sampleable. And I am going to allow you guys to download it for free. So if you have a MIDI keyboard or a computer, you can download the software and play any key on this that works and use your own music with it. And for those not familiar with the process of sampling, it's where you, at least on a keyboard instrument, press each note a few times at each velocity that you desire, and then plug that into a program, which would then allow someone digitally to plug their keyboard in and then play those notes at different velocities, which would then correlate with the velocities you recorded it at. So I went along and recorded every note that still worked, and then put them together so that you guys could play them. I hope you guys enjoyed this posh documentary about this important instrument for my career. He is the reason we have these keyboards today, and is the reason this channel exists. If you'd like to see more keyboard content, I have a lot of it on my YouTube channel. You might like that too.